So welcome back to Orchid House. I'm Olivier in Fort Lauderdale, and today I wanted to go over some basic aspects of orchid growing, watering, which in my opinion is the most important one, light, second most important one, fertilizing, important but not as much, and then temperatures, which is just a general consideration. And I think something extremely important is observation. So, watering. If you want to be a good orchid grower, in my opinion, you really have to master the watering part of it. Most orchids die from overwatering, sometimes underwatering, but that's usually the main reason for an orchid's demise. And I would say the second one is probably repotting at the wrong time. So I googled the information. I don't know if the percentages are exactly correct, but I mean, I think it's a good ballpark. So 70% of orchids are epiphytes, so which means they grow on trees, they attach to the tree, they are not parasites, they just use the tree as a support. And then 10% apparently are lithophytes, so it's the same principle, but instead of growing on trees, they grow on rocks. And then 20% are ground orchids, which is a different proposition. I mean, all these orchids here are epiphytes and maybe a few lithophytes. So the big thing about epiphytes is that their roots are exposed to the elements at all times. They're not in a pot, they don't stay wet all the time. So even when there's monsoon rains, the rain stops, they may stay wet a little longer because of the humidity in the air, but they're going to dry out fast because they're just exposed. So if you grow your orchids in a pot, you really have to keep in mind that in nature that's not how they grow, because in the pot they retain moisture a lot longer, and so these roots stay moist much longer than it's natural for them. So that's why you really have to master the wet and dry cycle, especially like cattleyas or oncidiums or orchids that have to dry out fully in between watering, because those roots need a rest, they cannot stay constantly wet. Now other orchids like stanopias, bulbophyllums, they usually tend to be very wet. But even those, they cannot be soaked at all times. They need some level of approach dryness at least. So that's something that you learn through time, but that's probably the most important part. Now, so you want to let them get dry, but when you water, you should soak. Most of these orchids are tropical orchids. They are used to soaking rain, and it's really important to really drench the medium. And I made a video recently with overnight soaking, so I do that every day now. I take a few of my orchids and I soak them overnight in the bucket, and it mimics a cycle of rain that they would have in nature, which is like constant rain for 10 hours, maybe a whole day, and they plump up. So I think that's another important part of the watering. If you have rainwater and a rain barrel, supposedly that's the best. Now obviously you have to, the rainwater doesn't have nutrients, so you usually have to fertilize more if you use rainwater, but it's more natural than what comes from your tap water, especially here in the United States, or probably in Europe, Australia. I mean, there's a lot of chemicals in it to neutralize everything, and so that's not necessarily a good thing for your orchids. So watering, super important, wet and dry cycle, soaking when you water. The second thing, the light. Well, obviously different orchids have different light needs, and you need to research that if you don't know it. Some orchids thrive and need full shade, but then most orchids, I would say, or maybe not most, but the majority will need a certain level of light. So to bright, they say bright shade, bright whatever, some need full sun. The thing is, so having the wrong amount of light seldom is a death sentence. If you don't water correctly, it can be a death sentence. The wrong amount of light will probably result, at least if there's not enough light, you're not going to have blooms or not enough blooms. So you can always err on the side of caution, give them a little bit less light, and then if it's not enough, you increase it gradually and the plant gets used to it. What's important is that you do that when the sun is the most gentle, so that's the winter. Obviously if you live on the equator, it's constant year round, so it doesn't make a difference. But if you live like I do in the United States or Europe or whatever, so you have a clear change throughout the year. And so in the winter the sun is much more gentle, and that's when you want to increase the amount of light. If you do that in the summer, when the sun is at its harshest, the plant all of a sudden gets a tremendous amount of harsh light, you risk killing it or burning it. So the best time to increase the light level, I would say, is in the winter. Now when it comes to light, you may have to reposition your plants throughout the year. In the winter the sun is much lower, in the summer it's much higher, and usually areas that might be shaded some part of the year, like in the summer, might be exposed to the sun in the winter. And it may not be a bad thing, because some of these orchids enjoy more light during the winter, and it's not a very harsh light, so you just have to figure that out, but just take that into the equation. Fertilizing, that's just icing on the cake. If the light is wrong, if the watering is wrong, you can fertilize perfectly and you're not going to achieve anything. So obviously fertilizing is a good thing, it's a good practice. The general rule is to fertilize weekly. Now in English it rhymes, it may not rhyme in your language, but so weekly like every week, and weekly like at week level, so half, usually at the most half the recommended level on the tag. And that should be good enough. Now some orchids need a lot more fertilizing than others. Vandas are very hungry orchids. Carasinums are massively hungry during the growing season only. Stenopias need a lot of fertilizing, so that you just have to learn. And that's the type of fertilizing, your guess is as good as mine. I alternate 4 different types, because everybody swears by one product, and in the end I don't think that anybody really knows which one is best. So by alternating I just spread my odds, and I think that's the best approach. Then temperatures, it's just when you buy your plant you need to buy something that's going to work for you. So I grow my orchids outdoors year round in a subtropical climate, so what I need are hot growing orchids and warm growing orchids. I can grow intermediate orchids, so those are plants that usually don't like our high temperatures in the 90s in the summer, or like 32, 33 or more in terms of Celsius. But I mean, if you give them less light and good ventilation, they might work. What will not work for me are cold or cool growing orchids, so it depends on where you are. That's something that you need to know ahead of time. Now that's for species. If you have a hybrid, what's good is to research what's in the background of your orchids, of your hybrid. So it might be heavily hybridized orchids, a Cattleya with like 10 parents in the background, and some of these parents might be colder growing and others really hot growing, and that gives you a plant that's going to be more tolerant of different temperature levels. So that you just have to figure out for yourself. And then the last thing that I would say is very important is observation. So you need to observe your plants regularly, and observation is visual, but it's also tactile. You want to touch your plants, you want to feel the leaves, feel the bulbs. These leaves, they need to be plump, hard. The bulbs need to be plump as well. And then if that's not the case, you need to address the situation. It may be not enough water, or it may be too much water. And too much water leads to root decay, and if the roots are gone, well, the plant is unable to absorb the moisture that it needs, and it starts decaying. So then I'm not going to go into the various remedies that you need there, but observation, I think, is also as much as proper watering are probably the 2 most important keys for successful orchid growing. So just a few basic ideas that I wanted to throw out there today. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.